Functions are similar to procedures in most of its features except for the fact that they return a single value. Functions are named PL, SQL blocks that are used to implement modularization in the application. You should define functions to represent a logical functionality of the application. Procedures do the same job except for the fact that functions return a value to the calling environment. In case of procedures, you can see the output of the procedure by accessing the out parameters of the procedure, and procedures may or may not have an output, but functions will always return a value. Syntax for creating functions. A function is a PL, SQL block that returns a value. A return statement must be provided to return a value with a data type that is consistent with the function declaration. You create new functions with the create function statement, which may declare a list of parameters, must return one value, and must define the actions to be performed by the standard PL, SQL block. The type of value returned from the function can be a scalar data type or a composite data type. The HR manager in this scenario wants to calculate the tax applicable for an employee. He wants to use this in some mathematical expression. For instance, to calculate the payable salary for an employee, the tax per month must be deducted from the salary value in the employees table for that employee. Net salary equals salary, tax applicable. The HR manager requires a program construct that can substitute the value of tax applicable in the mathematical expression. Functions are useful in such scenarios. You can write a function for tax and pass the employee_id as the input parameter. The function should pick up the value of the salary from the database, calculate the applicable tax, and return the value of the tax into the mathematical expression. The expression would in turn calculate the net salary. You create a procedure to store a series of actions for later execution. A procedure can contain 0 or more parameters that can be transferred to and from the calling environment, but a procedure doesn't have to return a value. A procedure can call a function to assist with its actions. You create a function when you want to compute a value that must be returned to the calling environment. A function can contain 0 or more parameters that are transferred from the calling environment. Functions typically return only a single value, and the value is returned through a return statement. Functions used in SQL statements should not use out or in-out mode parameters. Although a function using output parameters can be used in a PL, SQL procedure or block, it can't be used in SQL statements. To develop a function by using a tool such as SQL Developer, perform the following steps. 1. You can create the function using SQL Developer or SQL+. 2. Compile the function. The function is created in the database on compilation. The create function statement creates and stores the source code and the compiled M code in the database. The compilation process can be GUI-based as in SQL Developer, or as in the case of command line interface such as SQL+, you can compile the function like any other command. 3. If compilation errors exist, then the M code isn't generated and you must edit the source code to make corrections. You can't invoke a function that contains compilation errors. You can view the compilation errors in the compiler log of SQL Developer, SQL+, when you compile the code. 4. After successful compilation, execute the procedure to perform the desired action. You can run the procedure using SQL Developer GUI or use the execute command in SQL+. You create a get_sal function to retrieve the value of the salary of an employee. The code in the first code box creates the function. When the function is successfully compiled, you see the response, function get_sal compiled, as shown in the slide. The function has one input parameter and returns a number value. It accepts the employee_id and retrieves the salary of the employee with the given employee_id. The get_sal function follows a common programming practice of using a single return statement that returns a value assigned to a local variable. If your function has an exception section, then it may also contain a return statement. You can incorporate a function call as part of a PL, SQL expression because the function will return a value to the calling environment. You can incorporate multiple function calls in a single PL, SQL expression, resulting in a simpler and maintainable code. Functions can be invoked in the following ways. As part of PL, SQL expressions, you can use host or local variables to hold the returned value from a function. The first example in the slide uses a host variable and the second example uses a local variable in an anonymous block. You can create a new function in SQL Developer by using the following steps. 1. Right-click the Functions node. 2. Select New Function from the shortcut menu. The Create PL SQL function dialog box is displayed. 3. Select the schema, function name, and the parameters list, using the plus icon, and then click OK. The code editor for the function is displayed. 4. Enter the function's code. 5. To compile the function, click the compile icon. How to create a tax function to calculate income tax. The function accepts an employee_id as input parameter and calculates the tax applicable for that employee based on the salary of that employee. To execute the code shown in the slide example in SQL Developer, enter the code in the SQL worksheet, and then click the Run Script icon. The tax function is invoked as an expression in the select clause along with the employee ID, last name, and salary for employees in a department with ID 100. The return result from the tax function is displayed with the regular output from the query. Calling user-defined functions in SQL statements. User-defined functions act like built-in single-row functions and can be used in the select list or clause of a query. Conditional expressions of the where and having clauses. The order by and group by clauses of a query. The values clause of the insert statement. The set clause of the update statement. The user-defined PL SQL functions that are callable from SQL expressions must meet the following requirements. The function must be stored in the database. The function parameters must be in and of valid SQL data types and PL SQL specific data types. The functions must return data types that are valid SQL data types and PL SQL specific data types such as Boolean, record, or table. The following restrictions apply when calling a function in a SQL statement. Parameters must use positional notation or named notation. You must own or have the execute privilege on the function. You may need to enable the _enable option in the function specification to allow a parallel execution of the SQL statement using the function. Each parallel session using the function will have private copies of the function's local variables. A function executes with or without input parameters and returns a value. A function is expected to return one value of scalar data type or composite data type. However, developers can also use out or out parameters, which also reflect the output of the function. Functions can update global variables, perform update and other DML operations on the database. If the function definition has any of the operations mentioned in the slide, then those updates and modifications are side effects of the function execution besides the value returned. The code example in the slide demonstrates that, when a function is called from an update or delete statement, the function cannot query or modify database tables modified by that statement. The DML_SQL_call function is invoked in the update statement on the employees table and the function definition has an insert statement on the employees table. You can see that DML_call_SQL function in the slide contains an insert statement that inserts a new record into the employees table and returns the input salary value incremented by 100. This function is invoked in the update statement that modifies the salary of employee 170 to the amount returned from the function. The update statement fails with an error indicating that the table is mutating. Therefore, a function invoked in an update statement on a table, which in turn has DML statements for the same table, would lead to an error. The guidelines to be followed to avoid undesirable side effects of a function execution. Additional restrictions apply when a function is called in expressions of SQL statements. When a function is called from a select statement or a parallel update or delete statement, the function cannot modify database tables. When a function is called from an update or delete statement, the function cannot query or modify database tables modified by that statement. When a function is called from a select, insert, update, or delete statement, the function cannot execute directly or indirectly through another subprogram or SQL transaction control statements. PL SQL allows arguments in a subroutine call to be specified using positional, named, or mixed notation. A tax calculation function which accepts two parameters as input. The input parameters p_id and p_allowances represent the employee_id and allowances payable to the employee, respectively. The second code box shows various valid function calls for the function tax_new. The first function called tax_new, 100, uses positional parameter, where the first parameter is the employee_id. The p_allowances parameter is substituted with the default value of 500. The second function call also uses positional parameters where the first value represents the employee_id and the second value represents the allowances for the employee. The third function call uses named parameters where the values of the parameters are mentioned along with the names. The fourth function call has the parameter employee_id with the named notation, and the parameter p_allowances is provided through the default value. The source code for PL, SQL subprograms is stored in the data dictionary tables. The source code is accessible to PL, SQL procedures that are successfully or unsuccessfully compiled. To view the PL, SQL source code stored in the data dictionary, execute a select statement on the following tables. The user_source table to display PL, SQL code that you own. The all_source table to display PL, SQL code to which you have been granted the execute right by the owner of that subprogram code. The query example shows all the columns provided by the user_source table. The name column holds the name of the subprogram in uppercase text. The type column holds the subprogram type, such as procedure or function. The line column stores the line number for each source code line. The text column holds PL, SQL source code. The origin_con_id holds the ID of the container where the data originates. The value of the container ID can range from 0n based on database configuration. To view a function's code in SQL Developer, perform the following steps. 1. Click the Functions node in the Connections tab. 2. Click the function's name. 3. The function's code is displayed in the Code tab as shown in the slide. Using the drop statement. When a stored function is no longer required, you can use a SQL statement in SQL Plus to drop it. To remove a stored function by using SQL Plus, execute the drop function SQL command. Using create or replace versus drop and create. The replace clause in the create or replace syntax is equivalent to dropping a function and recreating it. When you use the create or replace syntax, the privileges granted on this object to other users remain the same. When you drop a function and then recreate it, all the privileges granted on this function are automatically revoked.